we have a finite planet with finite resources, whereas like our capitalist system requires the global economy to double every 12 years. That's just is incompatible. The Niger Delta, which is the most polluted area of the world, and the life expectancy there is only 42 years of age. They're seen as able to be sacrificed for profit to be accrued. Don't feel like you have to do the biggest thing right now. My biggest advice is do whatever is a little bit brave for you right now.
Hey, I'm so excited to do this episode of our podcast with a new friend, someone I've long admired, Mikaela Loach, who is here from the United Kingdom. We are so lucky to have her. We are literally on the first full day after the U.S. publication of her book. Yeah. It's called It's Not That Radical, Climate Action to Transform Our World. Now, I know we're going to talk about the book. We're going to talk about a lot of things. So this is an incredibly interesting, young, dynamic climate justice leader. Honored, by the way, to have you here.
Oh, no, thank you. I'm so honored to be here and really honored by your words. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. A lot to talk about. I've been reading your book. Haven't read the whole thing, but man, it is titillating. It's provocative and it's interesting. Now, look, there's a lot of books, as everyone knows, on climate and how to deal with the climate crisis. I think what makes this book different, from what I can tell, is like the sharp angles that you use to go after the problem, to attack the problem, and you do it so intelligently, and you bring in other thinkers, and you write in a very, very accessible way. Like if you don't know much about the climate crisis, or you know someone who doesn't know much about the climate crisis, or you have kids, you are just kind of getting into the 13, 14-year age group, get this book. Like, this is a really accessible book. So, enough for me. Tell us, like, how did you come to write it? And sort of tell us what you want people to take away from it, most of all.
Yeah, well, I started writing it after being quite burnt out from medical school. So I was studying as a junior doctor, or student doctor. And we just had, like, many COVID lockdowns, and it'd been
so you were in medical school during COVID?
Yeah. So I was working on medicine of the elderly wards, which was very intense, and also really, I think, highlighted like the social conditions that make people sick, even more than any other time, to be honest. And I was also campaigning. I was a claimant on a court case against the UK government. We were taking them to court around fossil fuel subsidies because the UK had this policy that made the North Sea in the UK the most profitable place in the world to extract oil and gas because of these like tax loopholes. So I was doing this court case. I was also challenging these oil fields, Cambo oil field in particular. So doing all this campaigning and doing med school. And trying to communicate about the climate crisis as well as much as possible. And I felt like I wasn't able to get into the depths of the arguments that I had, especially around challenging capitalism, especially around challenging whiteness and connecting that to the climate crisis through just like news media appearances or just through social media or things like that. And I wanted to take some time to really get into it. So I took a sabbatical from medical school for many reasons. And during that, I started writing this book and having the time also to really work through my arguments, to think through the climate crisis, what climate justice really means was such a privilege, I think, to be able to have and to do so much more reading around it, but also to be able to explain all of this and talk about this in a clear way. Because when I was writing it, the reason I wrote it actually was a friend that I went to school with, who she didn't like go to university or have the same access to a lot of education that like I was able to, and just took a different path in life, but cares a lot and has a really, really big heart. And I was talking to her about my work and my activism, and she was like, oh, I'd love to understand this a bit more. Like, could you recommend a book to me that I could read? And I actually couldn't think of any book that existed that was accessible and engaging and that talked about all of these things that I wanted to be able to communicate to her in particular. And so I was like, I think it's Toni Morrison who was like, if there's a book that you think should exist that hasn't been written yet, then you should write it.
I think it's this book.
Yeah, so that's what I wanted to do. And now I'm really glad that it's out there.
I think you succeeded in your mission. Just out of curiosity, before we get a little bit into the book, are you done with med school, or you want to go back and finish? You want to be a doctor?
I think I've left doctoring behind. It was quite difficult because from a very, very young age, I wanted to be a doctor. I have Caribbean parents, so
They're like, you got to be a doctor or a lawyer.
I think I thought it was my own idea, and then it's only actually been since I've left medical school that I realized how much it meant to my mum in particular, and I didn't realize that as much before, because I also really I find the human body so fascinating, and I think at school especially, if you care about the world and you want to make the world a better place and you're good at school, people become a doctor, and it felt like a kind of obvious consequence. But medicine, practically, I found that the amount of change that I was actually able to make was not as big as I thought. A lot of the people who come in, they'd be sick because of social issues. They'd be sick because their housing is not as it should be, or because they don't have access to healthy food, or just because of poverty, to be honest. And we as doctors couldn't fix that. What we could do is patch people up, but then send them back out into the same conditions that made them sick, and then we'd see them come back in a few months, and it was quite demoralizing, I think, and made me really think about how can I live a life and do work that stops people from getting sick in the first place rather than just patches them up. And that's what I try and do with my organizing and my writing and campaigning
work cool.
now.
I can relate to that because when I was a young lawyer just out of law school, I was a public defender in the United States. You represent people who don't have enough money to hire their own lawyers. And most people accused of crimes in this country live in, pretty resource poor conditions. And I kept seeing this. I was representing children. I kept seeing the same people come back. We'd get a good result on the case. A few months later, same person would be right back in the office. And I quickly realized the conditions of our society were producing crime. And they were designed that way, just like they produce sickness.
Yeah.
And I felt the exact same damn thing. I really wanted to get out and deal with broader structural challenges that were producing the problems that were manifesting in these individual cases. So I salute you. But I will say that one thing about this book that I find that you don't see very much in the discussion about the climate crisis is the racial component, the issue of white environmentalism, you call it, the role of white supremacy in sort of maintaining the status quo such that the climate crisis never seems to get adequately dealt with, even though I would say there's a lot of consciousness now around the world that it exists and it really poses an existential threat to our planet. So help us understand that a little bit from your perspective. I've never seen a chapter in a climate book about white environmentalism and its role in sort of in the whole climate movement.
Yeah,
Talk us through that.
I mean, that's a big issue. Why are we not talking about whiteness when it's a system that has produced, we can't talk about capitalism without talking about understanding whiteness properly. We can't talk about the climate crisis without understanding which communities have been deliberately sacrificed for such a long time. If we I just think if we look back at when ExxonMobil did the kind of first climate science and they worked out and predicted that their own products were causing this huge crisis, and their models predicted also that it would be tropical areas and areas of the world where what I would refer to as the global majority is where people of color is another term that you can use, reside in the majority. That's where it'll be impacted most. And that choice, even in that, to be we're not going to do anything about that, is choosing that those lives are not seen as valuable enough to save. I really do believe that if it had been the global north that was being impacted most by the climate crisis, that action would have happened far, far quicker in a much more dramatic way. But it's this belief that of this hierarchy of lives, that some lives are more valuable than others. And this hierarchy is also, it's very deliberate so that those who are deemed to be on the bottom of that hierarchy, their lives can be extracted from and exploited from in order for an ever smaller amount of people to have more than they could ever need. And that is whiteness as a system. And it's not just about pigment, and it's not just about the color of people's skin. It's about power. If we look back as well, if we're thinking about our economic system and capitalism as well, like race and whiteness was invented in order for people who were then termed as black Africans who were kidnapped from the African continent and enslaved, in Barbados in particular. Race as a construct was created in order to separate these Africans who'd been kidnapped from indentured Irish workers, who actually would have united together against the common enemy of the ruling classes, but instead were told that they have something separate from them. And that concept of race was created so that this use of African descendant people's bodies was seen as acceptable, this use through slavery and this profiting from it. And that, like, capitalism as a system generally, and this idea of extraction, this idea of like endless production, is what has also left us with this climate crisis. If we look at like sacrifice zones across the world, especially the Niger Delta, which is the most polluted area of the world, it's in Nigeria, and the life expectancy there is only 42 years of age.
It's amazing.
Which is really shocking, and that's like 10 years lower than the life expectancy of Nigeria as a whole, so in just that area. And that's a direct consequence of Shell exploiting the land and the people there for oil, and how they gained access to there was through colonialism as well. So it was the like British government needed to change the supply of their ships from coal to oil, and so they wanted to find somewhere where they could get all that oil. So they bought the entire country of Nigeria in order to give the like oil-rich areas of the Niger Delta exclusively to Shell, which was then a British company. And Shell operated there since that colonial period and damaged the lives of people there. My friend was visiting another friend of ours, Ken Henshaw, there recently. He works with We the People Nigeria. And she was sending me photos of the water people have to drink there, and it's literally oil. Like it's so incredibly awful, and the health impacts that are being experienced there are because those people's lives are not seen as valuable. Like they are seen as less than. They're seen as able to be sacrificed for profit to be accrued for
and extracted and given to other people
in the global north in particular. Yeah.
You know, it's funny. I very much saw what you're talking about in Nigeria, and in my experience in Ecuador, where I've been over 200 times, representing the Amazon communities down there, as you know, and it's the same exact dynamic. It's like the indigenous people these very, humble, campesinos, farmers in these small communities had their resources literally stolen by the fact that this American company went down there and made a decision without consulting a single person on the ground to basically dump their toxic waste into rivers and streams that people were drinking out of and fishing out of and bathing in. And over time, thousands and thousands of people contracted cancer. And this company just went in there and did that. That also is a sacrifice zone.
Yes,
and we have sacrifice zones within the UK, within the United States, within, overall by GDP standards, wealthy countries have zones of extreme, resource poverty and discrimination and lack of access to basic resources, healthcare, food. And we see that all over the place. How does this idea of sacrifice zones relate to what we can do about the climate crisis?
Well, I think it's important for us to understand that this is happening. So I think that sometimes when we talk about the connection of like race and climate, all these things, people are like, oh, well, pollution doesn't see color or whatever it is. So how is race connected? Like, it's not like pollution sees a black person. It's like, I'm going to give you more pollution. But it's more about the power these communities are like given access to. So for example, where are like toxic waste dumps put next to? In the US, like especially because of redlining and systems like that, they are placed next to black and brown communities in particular. And that's how these communities end up with like worse health outcomes, because they are put in areas where they are literally being poisoned. And I think if we understand that this is a reality that's happening, we can recognize that we need to, well, one, that no community should, I think there's an issue sometimes that you can end up with, like, there can then be this like idea of NIMBYism of like, well, not in my backyard. So it's not that we just want to push these sacrifice zones into a different community or somewhere else, but it's more by illuminating the fact that there are sacrifice zones, there are communities that are being sacrificed, we can understand that our system of extractivism, so this like system of focusing on extraction too much, is against humanity, and it's against what we should be wanting in our world, and therefore we need to actually have a different system where we aren't causing this amount of harm to people, where in the Niger Delta we've cleaned up those messes, where I think it's really important actually for us to understand the climate crisis, because I think that we can think that as long as it's not fossil fuels, or as long as it's like climate action, it's good. This is a really key thing I wanted to get across in the book, is that not all climate action is good. We can end up continuing this extractivism into like the renewable space.
Right.
So we can end up with sacrifice zones. There are sacrifice zones that are happening because of renewables as well, because of the minerals that are needed for that. If we look at the Democratic Republic of Congo, if we look,
you mean like minerals for lithium
yes.
batteries?
Yeah, exactly. In Bolivia,
cars,
there's like big issues with the with like water usage because of lithium, and so these same sacrifice zones that have been created for the fossil fuel extractivism can be replicated in renewables.
Yeah.
And so it's really, really important that we realize this isn't the only way, but that the way that we resist this is actually scaling down consumption, which is just far more than we
Speaking
need
of
right
consumption, as you know, we have a economic system that, is based on constant perpetual growth and consumption. It's called capitalism.
Yeah.
Do you think, and I know you have a chapter on capitalism, which I love, do you think it is possible to solve the climate crisis in a capitalist framework, or do we need something, a really radical transformation of our economy to solve the climate crisis?
I mean, I absolutely don't think that it's possible to tackle the climate crisis adequately under capitalism. Like, we have a finite planet with finite resources, whereas like our capitalist system requires the global economy to double every 12 years. That's just is incompatible. Like we will run out of resources, and we are running out of resources currently. And also that capitalism requires us, in order for this growth of the economy, this like doubling of the economy, we are like forced to buy loads of shit that we don't need to service this growth. And it's not necessary growth. It's not growth that is linked to like well-being or, better societies or better health or anything like that. It's just growth. And it's so like completely illogical that we're still following this, especially with the climate crisis, but also that we have societies that are like wildly unhappy whilst these economies are growing. Like this growth does not equate to well-being. And instead what we need to do is have societies that are, and like countries where instead of it's GDP, it's well-being. It's like, what is the like health outcomes of our population?
We need a whole new way to define
it's success.
Societal success.
Success should not be, success isn't growth.
Right. It's not GDP.
No, it's not GDP. It's not growth. And we deserve something better as well, I think. And I think it's so bizarre how we will see capitalism as this like only way that we can do things.
Right.
When like most major religions are older than capitalism. Like it's only around 200 years old as a system. So like, and so also people will be like, oh, well, if we end capitalism, that ends like trading or markets. Like markets existed before capitalism. Like people were trading things before that. Capitalism isn't the whole world. The world will exist beyond it, and the world has existed before it, and we do deserve something better than that.
You're 27 years old, and I'm much older than you. I'm not going to disclose my age. Like when you look down the road to the future that you want, the world you want to live in, like where do you think things are going to be when you're 40 or 50? Like, are you hopeful or are you pessimistic?
I have to be hopeful, otherwise I wouldn't do the work that I'm doing. I think if I didn't believe
By the way, this book is really hopeful.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's hopeful, by the way, because it's realistic.
Yeah,
like
I think that hope for me isn't flimsy, and it can't be like, hope for me isn't like head in the clouds. It's like feet grounded in the soil. It's like we are aware of the world as it is. And in the way also we're aware of like people's histories of how change has happened. And that every single transformational change that's happened throughout history has been looked on before as being impossible. And then it's happened. And then whenever it happens, history is rewritten to make out that everyone knew that was going to happen and it was inevitable.
Yeah.
When like, if you actually look through history, that's not the case. And so I think if the impossible has been made possible before, then it will be made possible again. And I think about how like, whilst our circumstances with the climate crisis like are dire, and there are losses that we won't be able to fully change. Whatever we can change, whatever we can save is really important. And also on this thing of impossibility, I just think about how like my ancestors in Jamaica, they were enslaved, and I can't even like imagine what their life was like and what they went through. And yet so many enslaved people still fought, and still like slavery was not just ended by people. Slavery was not just ended by like white people writing letters and suddenly having a moral epiphany.
It was ended by struggle.
It was ended by
resistance.
struggle and revolts, and slave revolts in particular.
Uh-huh.
And if in those conditions that were so much more impossible than ours, in that existential threat to existence, people still believed that a better world was worth fighting for, that was worth living for, that like writing songs and singing together was still worth doing, then we can also believe that a better world is. And that's what I draw on my ancestors, and I think if they could do that, then we can do this. And if that thing that seemed impossible ended, these things around us that seem impossible can end too, and that new things can grow that are literally beyond our wildest imaginations. Yeah. And I also believe that like what we believe in grows. Like if we don't believe things are possible, they're not going to be possible. So we have to believe, and we have to like engage in that radical imagination of what is possible.
It's funny on that point. I mean, like I actually believe part of their strategy, the fossil fuel industry and the sort of the powers that try to keep control over our society and the control over capitalism, they actually want us to believe we can't do it. I think there's a lot of psychological games going on.
Yeah, so much
and so
money.
a lot of this repression is like, we have the power, and sorry, there's nothing you can do about it. They want to actually display that power.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say even 10, 15 years ago, at least in this country, like they tried to hide it. They tried to act like, oh, we're a rule of law country. And, oh, I'm sorry you lost your legal case. You had rights, maybe you'll win one in the future. Whereas now, I mean, particularly we see this under Trump. I mean, there's just outright massive, what I would consider to be illegal repression by an authoritarian leader who really has fascist fantasies.
Yeah.
And, you see this a bit in the UK, not as open, but like the laws that the UK
I would say it's
passed,
actually very open. Like,
not so much Stormer, like, I mean, Stormer, but Stormer actually has that pretty face and acts like he's Mr. Rule of Law, but in reality, he's overseeing a system of massive repression of free speech.
For sure. We have a human rights lawyer prime minister who has overseen some of the like greatest repression of protest and resistance. Like, I mean, we had the public order bill that was passed mere months ago, maybe a year ago, that has dramatically limited like what protest is allowed. Initially, when it was first drafted, it was saying that like you legally wouldn't be able to encourage people to go to a protest, which is what like that's so ridiculous. And there's
was that coming out of a desire to suppress the pro-Palestinian movement?
In a big way,
or just climate stuff?
I think it was actually more in response to climate stuff. So it was more in response to Just Stop Oil. So Just Stop Oil, they had like shut down.
They shut down the highways.
Lots of. They've done a lot of like disruptive actions, and that led. I don't want to like blame them for it, because it's like the repression should not happen at all. But I think as a consequence of that, there have been more. I mean, we've seen people from Just Stop Oil get like multi-year prison sentences for like throwing soup on a painting. That's wild. That should not be like, and a painting that's covered in glass. Like, it's not, as much as I don't agree tactically with maybe those actions, I still do not believe that people should be being like imprisoned for non-violent direct action. And I mean, recently, like Palestine Action is now prescribed as a terrorist organization in the UK. So I and no one else in the UK is allowed to profess any support for them. They're a non-violent direct action group. They have shut down 2 weapons factories in the UK. So had like a material impact on disrupting the Israeli war machine, and also highlighting to the UK public that weapons that are used to bomb children in Gaza are being manufactured in the UK. But now, even saying anything in support of them could get you 14 years in prison. Like, it's actually, it's beyond like outrageous. And that's the first time that a non-violent direct action group has been prescribed as a terrorist organisation in the UK, and that's happening under our like so-called human rights lawyer, Prime Minister.
Isn't it interesting that a group that's protesting massive human rights violations committed by the Israeli government against Palestinians, what every credible scholar believes is genocide, is outlawed itself as a terrorist group. I mean, talk about Orwellian, talk about turning language on its head. That is a perfect example. But we see that all the time. I mean, the Israeli government, which in my opinion is committing state terrorism against Palestinians, my personal opinion. If you look at the definition of terrorism, that's what it is. I'm sorry. To strike terror into the minds and lives of innocent civilians to achieve a political aim. That's what Israel is doing to Palestinians right now. Yet they call everyone who challenges them either a terrorist or a terrorist sympathizer. I mean, right now, we're in the Upper West Side of Manhattan in New York City. Literally 10 blocks away from here, Mahmoud Khalil was abducted, Columbia grad student, never charged with a crime, abducted because he spoke out against what Netanyahu and the Israeli government was doing to Palestinians in Gaza and beyond. And Marco Rubio and others, our Secretary of State, claimed that he was either a terrorist or a terrorist sympathizer, which is completely false. I mean, I happen to know him personally. And I mean, there's no evidence of that. He's not that way. Anyone who knows him knows he's not that way. But they make up these labels in order to delegitimize those who take part in peaceful, nonviolent, politically protected resistance to oppression. And it's a mechanism that I've noticed, because I got targeted with that prior to Trump. I mean, this started happening to me 15 years ago from Chevron, because I work in Ecuador, which led to my incarceration for almost 3 years. 6 weeks in prison, and here in this apartment, I was detained with an ankle bracelet for over 900 days. It is an effort by the state, which is sort of exists interstitially with a lot of powerful corporations in the fossil fuel space, in the defense space, in the pharmaceutical space. And it is really designed to target people who are a little too successful in challenging the oppression. And they choose the targets. That's why Julian Assange got hit. They choose high-profile targets to use as examples to try to intimidate the heck out of everybody else. That's what's the activist name in the UK? I think his first name is Roger, who got a 5-year sentence. Who am I think? You know who I'm talking about, right?
I think he was with Just Stop Oil. Politics.
but he they have to hold up the high profile examples.
They do.
To try to intimidate people.
I think also on a global context, I think that it's important for us not to normalize this repression and arrest of activists, especially because it's one of my best friends, Disha Ravi. She's an Indian climate activist, and a few years ago, I think it was in 2021, she was like abducted from her home by the Indian police, and held in solitary confinement, then held in house arrest because they said that she was she'd edited they alleged that she'd edited a Google Doc around the Indian farmer strikes, and they said that was an act of sedition against the Indian government.
Incredible.
Which is wild. And the thankfully at that time the outrage globally around it, because I think she was 21, so she was super, super young, was huge, and that led to her release. Because in India they don't have like limits on how long the government can hold people without charges or without trial. So thankfully, because of that backlash, she was released, because there's a lot of international outrage about it. What I worry about is because there's been this like normalization of repression, when those things are happening today, are people like less outraged about them happening? And does that mean that people, especially in the global south, are like less safe because there's less outrage? And that's where I think I can have some difficulty with in the global north, the like tactics of protest to the tactic being arrest, because I think that normalization of arrest, if it's not strategic, if the strategy is, because I was part of XR, our strategy was, let's get as many people as possible arrested, let's fill up all the prison cells so that they can't arrest all of us, and that the public respond to that with these are non-violent people, this should not be happening to them, and that there's like a moral outrage that leads to that. Was the strategy with the next art. I now see on a global perspective how that normalization of arrest, I don't think benefits people across the world who are living in regimes that are much more oppressive, and where we should be seeing outrage to that repression. And that's where I think I've changed my perspective a bit. I think that arrest is, or doing things that are like in resistance to the state, when they are strategic and impactful, like I talk about in the book, I reference Andreas Malm's How to Blow Up a Pipeline, and that kind of argument around sabotage, which I think is really interesting, and an important one to recognize throughout history. How that's made changes is important, but I think this kind of like glamorization of arrest, I worry about because especially given like we have incarcerated siblings across the world who don't want to be in prison, and I think that glamorizing prisons generally is not the best for anyone's kind of liberty. Yeah.
You know, it's interesting because a lot of the people you see engaging in those strategies are not people who come from repressed communities.
Exactly.
They're not people of color. They're generally white environmentalists in the United States. And, you know, what's interesting to me, I mean, I think your point is really interesting. Not one that's given a lot of thought here. I mean, people sort of in the movement, I think, operate on the assumption that we have to confront the power. And if it means we get arrested, we're just going to get arrested. And there's a lot of arrests here too, like there were with, you know, XR and that strategy in the UK. It's interesting though that the state, I think the movement, I mean, I don't know if you agree with this. I mean, I'll ask you, do you think the movement has grown to such a point of strength that the tools of repression, the sophisticated tools of repression that the state is now employing against protest is a byproduct of our own effectiveness?
Yeah, I definitely, I mean, I think, for example, with the like Palestine Action case study, the reason that they are being prescribed as a terrorist organization is because they have shut down multiple weapons factories in the UK because the actions they're doing have had an impact. I think that's like quite clear to see. It's not because they are terrorizing the public in any way. Like
excuse me, I'm going to say as a lawyer, that's not terrorism.
No,
that's property destruction.
Yes, exactly.
It's totally different.
Yeah, and so I think that
you can't just slap the word terrorism on some behavior, whether it's vandalism, property destruction that you don't like, as a way to politicize it, to delegitimize everyone who's raising those issues. I mean, it's just wrong.
Yeah, no,
but that's what's happening.
No, and I think but I think that this is something that like Marx also talked about, like how there will be like, before there is you know, like a revolution or a big change, there will be like a lot of state repression that comes before that, and that fascism kind of precedes that. And so I do see that that's the phase that we're in now. I think I'm also glad that people are choosing to still stand up and do something and not be afraid, because a big function of all of this is just to make you afraid of doing anything or resisting, to make you stay home. And and that's why, like, in some ways I'm glad that people are responding to things, because I saw like a placard on like a photo on protest recently that was like, if Kamala had won, we'd all be at brunch. And I was like, that's the problem. Like, because these same raids would still be happening on communities, but they'd be painted a nice color so that people wouldn't be out in the open. It wouldn't be out. Yeah. And so people would be okay with them, wouldn't be resisting. I think that one thing about like, the obvious enemy in some ways, I think, can mobilize people. And I'm hoping that people right now are being like mobilized or are being like radicalized, I guess, in the sense that they will see what's happening around us, especially when it comes to the genocide that's happening in Palestine, and realize that we don't want our governments, we don't want our communities to be complicit in this, and that also we can choose to stand up and do something. And I think looking through people's histories is really important for this, because again, if we're talking about terrorism labels, like those same labels of terrorism have been put on many people who today are like lauded as these great freedom fighters. Nelson Mandela, exactly, who was only removed from the US's list of the terrorist watch list when he was 90 years old, which is wild. So I think we need to remember that there's like a deliberate way we're told history, or like retold history that is different than it actually happened, and then think about how the way the world is happening today, how can we reflect on that, and how can we join, like get involved in your local community, like get to know your neighbors, get to know your neighbors' needs. I think I define organizing not as like making the change in this moment, but as building the capacity for revolutionary change to be possible. So it doesn't necessarily mean campaigning for that change right now, but when that tipping point is hit, so that you're ready and you
have the capacity.
You have the capacity and you know your neighbors and you know who to turn to, and people are ready to respond, so that, like, for example, if there is an immigration raid in your neighborhood, everyone knows what to do and who to talk to and how to show up. There was a neighborhood in Glasgow on a street called Cameo Street where on Eid a few years ago, they tried to do a immigration raid of this Muslim family on Eid, which is like just diabolical. But the neighbours all came out and called around everyone at Glasgow, and the entire street was filled with people who refused to let these immigration like vans leave, so that those people were then de-arrested and they didn't get deported.
That's incredible.
And that was because that community knew each other.
We're seeing a lot of that in communities in this country.
Exactly. And that's what I think organizing makes those moments possible. But organizing is that like invisible, slow, underground. I see it as like mycelium networks that allow the mushroom to fruit. So we might see the people at chemistry resist and think, wow, that was a miracle that came out of nowhere. But really, people have been doing that like slow, invisibilized work of organizing their community, so that's then possible. And I think that's what we need to be doing.
When you meet a young person, I mean, like younger than you, who's like, oh my God, you know, I love what you do. I want to get involved in that work, but I'm worried. They're going to put me in jail. I'm worried I might lose my job. I mean, what you just said is beautiful, like how to think about organizing given the situation the UK is in and the United States is in right now. But how do you advise young people who want to do the work? They want to get into the work of dealing with the climate crisis. They want to do the work of taking on structures of power that perpetuate the climate crisis and worsen it. How do you advise them? What do you tell them?
I think I just say get involved in a group that already exists in your area, because you'll learn so much from other people. That's what I did. Like when I was like a teenager and I really cared about migrant justice, that was the first kind of thing that I cared a lot about, especially as someone who'd like migrated to the UK, and I felt a level of like privilege in the fact that I was able to do that safely, legally and easily because I had a British father, still have British father. And whereas other people, like I think about this young kid called Alan Kurdi, he was 3 years old and Syrian. And I was, he was 2.5 in Syrian. And I was 2.5 when we moved to the UK from Jamaica. And again, I was able to do it safely, legally and easily because of that privilege. Whereas when he was 2.5 years old, his body washed up on a beach in Greece, trying to make the journey to Europe for safety. And that was genuine just because of horrible racist border systems. And I thought about that arbitrary difference and how I wanted to try and make our border systems a bit safer for people like Alan and people like in those situations. And so at first I just found a group and I joined it, and I went to Calais and I chopped vegetables and chopped wood and supported displaced communities there. And it was very...
How old were you at that time when you first got involved in that work?
I think I was 17 maybe. So I'd only do it like in my school holidays. So,
and how did you develop the awareness, the consciousness to know that you wanted to sort of help people and try to correct these injustices? Was that just going to school, learning, reading? Was it your parents? Like how did you evolve in terms of your consciousness?
I think it came from my parents. My parents are not like rad activists. They're very like normie normie people who just care, I think, and have big hearts. And my mum especially, and my dad especially as well, as like a white British man, he who lived in Jamaica, and then when we moved back to the UK, he wanted me not to like forget my Jamaican roots. So he would like have us read about the histories of Jamaican freedom fighters like Nanny of the Maroons, who she led the Maroons, who are these the groups of previously enslaved people who'd freed themselves and fought against the like British colonial powers, and they even won their own territories. They still have their territories in Jamaica today. Like she was my first hero, and she would like wear the teeth of the like British soldiers that she killed as a necklace around her neck. Strange stories to be telling your kid, but I think that taught me how change has been complicated and difficult, but also that enslaved people in particular and oppressed people across the world have liberated themselves. They've not waited for other people to come along and liberate them. And when I was like about 5 years old, I remember being like sneaking downstairs and my parents watching the news, and I saw on the news kids that looked like me, as in similar age, and I got really upset because they obviously looked like something difficult happened. I think it was the Boxing Day tsunami at that time, and my parents noticed that I was like upset at the door, and they sat me down, and my dad asked me a question which I think has like directed my life, which was just like he obviously checked I was okay first, but then he was like, if you care about this, what are you going to do about it? And I think that's the question that they've always challenged me to ask myself, is just, if you care about this, you don't have to be passive in the face of it. You can do something. And when I was 5, I like did a bake sale. Like it was not like the most like radical transformative action, but it showed me that like I had agency, and also that I could work with other people to make bigger change. And then as I've got older, I've kind of pushed that more and more and more. And so I think that what I would say to people is, 1, join a group in your local area, work with other people. And 2, don't feel like you have to do the biggest thing right now. My biggest advice is do whatever is a little bit brave for you right now. And so that little bit brave might be just attending.
That's a I love that phrasing.
Yeah,
do something a little bit brave at first.
You don't have to do everything, because I think
I'm invited to speak a lot to like law students, and you know, I talk about my experience with the the civil justice system in the United States, the battle against Chevron over pollution in Ecuador, and my ultimate incarceration, unjust incarceration. I was prosecuted by Chevron directly in the name of the U.S. government. Long story. But I tell people, please don't look at my experience as indicative of anything other than what it was. I mean, it's an important thing that happened. You got to learn lessons from it.
Yeah.
But, it took 25 years to like get to this point of work. And like most people starting out in their careers, whether they're lawyers or doctors or campaigners, just start with something and like build and have consciousness of like the big picture, not just what's going on in your community and how it all, how to connect the dots.
Exactly. I also think that this pedestaling of like exceptional individuals, and that's what I write about in the chapter, Heroes Won't Save Us, but Community Will, in the book, is I think that pedestaling acts to disempower the majority of people, because it's also like not how change has really happened. No. I mean, if we think about even like Martin Luther King, like he was chosen by like 5 black women in the church, in the black church in particular. If they needed someone to be like a spokesperson, people had been organizing for much longer before. Whilst like I have huge admiration for like his writing and his words and his communication, that's one role in the movement. Like obviously he was involved in strategy as well, but there were so many more people that made these changes possible. And I think that what instead we're told is, it's just exceptional individuals, like it's just like, and then everyone looks at that and is like, I can't do that, so I guess I don't have to do anything. I guess like I'm off the hook, or I guess like I'm not good enough, or I don't have agency. And instead, if we realize that change has been made by loads of ordinary people who've taken very ordinary roles that are like, I spend a lot of my time filling out like Google Sheets and doing admin for like groups to do things or for us to get things done. There's so much behind the scenes boring stuff. No, I say boring, but necessary, but stuff that can be done by anyone, and that all of us have skills in those different ways. There are things that I can't do that other people can do. There are things that I can do that maybe other people can't do, but like we all have a role in this movement body. And I think it's really important that we don't just see the people who are in some ways what we call like the propaganda wing of the movement, like just the people who are speaking and not everything. There's so much more underneath it. And that's why I try and remind myself of this like mushroom and mycelium metaphor of like all of the people who are doing the underground mycelium work that allow the mushrooms of what we see to be possible. But that mycelium is as important, if not more important than like, well, the mushroom wouldn't be possible without it. So I think that's why I wear this necklace. Yeah, I think it's just important for us to challenge that hero. It's just a mushroom.
Oh, okay.
But it just reminds me. It's just sometimes
because that's a great analogy.
Well, just because I think sometimes, especially when like we haven't seen change happen for a while, we're like, oh, what we're doing is useless and it's not having an impact. But I have to remind myself that what we're doing is we're building those mycelial networks, and that one day a mushroom will fruit. I think about Zoran Mandami's when in the primary as that's a mushroom. Those people beforehand would have for a long time would have been trying to push things to be more progressive, and might have like seen what they did as a failure because it didn't win in that moment. But that built those networks for his mushroom to fruit and to be possible. So just remember that what we're doing, it matters even if we don't see the results right now. We'd have to keep going and keep pushing.
So this whole like hero worship thing that we see in like the United States, UK, many like capitalist societies are like, it's all about the individual, and wow, like, you know, that person's extraordinary. I mean, Martin Luther King Jr., like he didn't want to be a hero. He didn't make himself into a hero. There were other people who projected onto him. And he was an extraordinary leader in many respects. He was a hero. But like he also, as you point out, was a product of tremendous sacrifices made by thousands and thousands of people. So, you know, is this sort of what happens in a sort of a commodified capitalist society where there's always got to be those heroes, you know, and that leads to a leadership style that isn't necessarily conducive to like revolutionary change?
Well, it's much easier to take down an individual than it is to like take down a whole like mass movement of people. And so I think it definitely benefits the ruling classes and like our existing systems for there to just be focused on like one individual, because then you can take that person down and then the whole movement dies. And that's why I think that movements that are based on individuals are weak and will fail. Because
they're inherently weak.
They're inherently weak because like individuals are like fallible, like we're people. Whereas if you become like a mass movement of people, then your politics are less easy to corrupt as well, I think. But I do think it comes from this, like, it's easier to commodify as well if it's like one person, like a person can become like a brand. And this is something that I write about in there, is this difficult of like resisting. And Naomi Klein writes really well about this in her most recent book, Doppelganger, of like, especially with social media and tech and things, and the this need to like brand people and especially under like late stage capitalism. And so I think resisting that like individualistic narrative is important, not just because of this like hero worshipping thing, but also as a wider issue. Because as workers, so like I'm a worker in the literary industry, for example, and if I see myself as an individual person who, like, if I'm able to pay my bills, that is my fault for not, if I'm not able to pay my bills, that's my fault. I'm a bad person. Like I'm not doing well enough.
You made poor decisions.
Yeah, I made poor decisions. Like it's a moral failing of me. Then I'm going to like feel terrible about myself. I'm not going to talk to other workers in the industry because I'll feel this level of guilt. Whereas if instead I see myself as part of a collective, and I see my, like if I talk to other workers in my industry, so I talk to other authors and I say, oh, I'm struggling about this part in my industry, or I've had this issue. For example, I helped found this group called Fossil Free Books, and we are like a worker organizing group in the literary industry, and we're trying to like unionize in many ways the whole literary industry, which is an industry which before has been seen as very individualistic, as if we are not workers, we are individual authors, when actually we work for publishers, we have shared interests, and we can use our collective bargaining power to push for change in our industry. So if we see ourselves as a collective, we talk to each other, then we can realize, oh, wait a minute, like I've also been having the same issue, and so have I. And so it becomes less about an individual failing, but more of a like an issue with our workplace, and that we can then work together to collectively bargain for something that's better for us. And this deliberate like push of this individualization, not even just in like kind of activism or heroes and things like that, was deliberately pushed by like people like Margaret Thatcher, and like this push of neoliberalism, of the like decimation of the labor movement and of the union movement.
Reagan was doing the same thing.
Yes, exactly. Together. And so I think it's really important that we realize that we actually are really connected to each other, that we push on this collectivism. And like, for example, through Fossil Free Books, we managed to, in our industry, get book workers, not just authors, but like editors and agents and like booksellers to all work together, and particularly around literary festivals in the UK, collectively work together using a framework that Jane McCleavy's framework from her Organising for Power course. Using that framework, we managed to, in many ways, like unionize our industry for Palestine and for the planet is kind of the tagline, I guess. And we realised that literary festivals in the UK were being sponsored by a asset manager called Baillie Gifford that had billions of pounds invested both in the in Israeli apartheid and genocide and also in fossil fuels. And we managed to get workers from across the industry to come together and say, we don't want that. We don't want our industry to be greenwashing that or to be covering for that. And that meant that, I mean, they won't admit that this is what did it, but Baillie Gifford suddenly stopped investing in in the Chinese National Offshore Oil Company, who with Total are trying to build the East African crude oil pipeline in Tanzania and Uganda. So, and that was a like material impactful change. And also Baillie Gifford no longer sponsor these literary festivals because they don't have the social license anymore, because people in the literary festivals realized, we don't want to be associated with that. So, and there's a lot that we can...
That's a success.
Yeah, it is a success. Well, I think that as a thing was complicated because the success is, I think, the unification of our industry.
Yeah.
The goal of that wasn't to get Baillie Gifford to leave the literary industry. The goal of that was to get Baillie Gifford to divest. It's deeply unfortunate that literary festivals themselves, in many ways, like refused to put that pressure on Baillie Gifford and instead were like, we're just going to get rid of Baillie Gifford rather than leveraging their position. Yeah. I mean, it is good that literary festivals are now happening without that complicity, but it would have been strategically more useful if these literary festivals had backed their authors and been like, we're going to put that pressure on Baillie Gifford with our special relationship that we have. But all of that is to say that I think that refusing to see ourselves as individuals, and I think pushing for collectivism is really, really important in many, many ways.
Donald Trump, sort of getting to the end here. Do you see Trump, or how do you see Trump? I mean, there's some people who say he's like a representation of the near collapse of the system. Or he portends like a consolidation of corporate and even fascist power that could haunt, our world, the United States and the broader world for decades to come. Like, how do you see Trump as an historical figure based on what we've been watching in recent months?
I mean, it's deeply, deeply troubling, even watching from afar. I mean, I was even on a personal level was like worried as whether I'd get into the country here and had to prepare a lot more, but I realized that I have passport privilege in the sense that many of my friends from the global south have to prepare in this way to come to the UK, and have... Was
your entry smooth?
It was, yeah. I got asked, but I was very prepared. I had a whole binder that any question that was asked, I had a letter to show exactly what my purposes of my visit was, and made sure. Best advice was given is do not lie at all. Like, why are you here? I'm going to a socialism conference. Okay. But I think that's what I was advised. But no, I am deeply worried because it's much harder to build things back than it is to take them like rights away, and rights of people are being taken away quite rapidly. But Donald Trump has been able to accrue this much power also because there's been like a huge gap in an alternative. Like there hasn't, and the same thing is happening in the UK right now because we have a so-called Labour government who do not represent the like interests of the people and are still representing the interests of the elite class and the rich, and not actually offering better lives. Yeah, but like what we need is an alternative.
You need a real Labour Party.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like we and it was so sad. We had that like in Corbyn's Labour before, which is I mean, hopefully there's going to be a new party being started soon, and there's going to be an alternative, and the Green Party in the UK gaining a lot of traction as well. And I'm hoping that an alternative will be being offered to people, because that's what we really need. It
is so similar here. We don't really have, in my opinion, we don't have an opposition party to Trump.
No, exactly.
I mean, the Democrats, people say, well, where are the Democrats? Well, I mean, my answer is they have nothing to work with because they spent so many years, sort of kowtowing to their corporate donors
Yeah.
that they never built up political force that they
Yeah.
could now use to neutralize Trump. There's
Yeah.
nothing to work with. So they sit there and there's some platitudes on TV. They can't mobilize people on the streets. There's no national strike. I mean, there's no mechanism to mobilize millions and millions of people in this country right now because the Democratic Party, I'm sorry, I'm pontificating, basically sold out the working class.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same thing with the Labour Party.
Yeah, that's what's happened. And because Corbyn's Labour, which actually like offered a genuine alternative society, which like I joined the Labour Party as a teenager because I was so excited by like Corbyn's view of a different world and this genuine alternative that seemed possible. And that was like, he was hounded by the press for like actually trying to like offer this alternative, because in the UK, 5 billionaires own 80% of our media. So that means that the stories that are being put across and the amount that they were attacked was like very strategic, and the Corbyn movement was kind of decimated by that. And now we've ended up with the Labour government that don't actually represent the people. And what that's going to leave is it's leaving again this vacuum because people want an alternative. And so our version of Donald Trump is Nigel Farage and the Reform Party, who a lot of people don't even know what Reform stand for, but they just want something different. Like there'll be people that I have friends who are doctors who've been speaking to people whilst they're working, or like colleagues even, and they'll be like, oh yeah, I'm going to vote for Reform. And they're like, do you know what that means? They're like, oh, I just want to change. I want something different. And Labour offering more of the same. The Tories are the Conservative Party are offering the same old rubbish as well. So we want something different. So I want Reform, but Reform are like this kind of reactionary, like right-wing populist party in the same way. And I think that the issue, especially in the election, was that like the Democrats, again, we weren't offering an alternative. Like it was, oh, we're not Trump.
Yeah.
And that's not offering people
That's not
something,
offering a positive vision of what society can be.
No.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it was really frustrating to watch. So, we do have some hope in New York City right now with Zohran Mamdani, like amazing mayoral candidate for the Democrats, built an incredible coalition, multi-ethnic, multi-racial, multi-class. All across the city. The establishment is freaking out about this guy. Like they want to destroy him. I mean, I don't think it's going to work. He's just too smart and too good and too real and, has too much integrity. But it's interesting that the one Democrat in the United States of America right now he's poised to take power in the biggest city in this country is freaking out the leaders of the opposition party. I mean, it's really tells you so much about where this country is and about the threat that people who do the work that you do and do the work that I do, trying to build a better society, based on the interests of the majority, the working class, the people who've been screwed over for so many decades, forever really through history. They don't want that to happen. Yeah. And we don't have an opposition party in the United States that really represents people, which has created an amazing opening for Trump. Yeah. I mean, if there was a real opposition party, Trump would probably have never been elected. And if he had, he wouldn't be able to run roughshod over our entire society like he is right now. And it's just extraordinary. I mean, is the Mamdani phenomenon, has it manifested in the UK? Are people watching it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was seeing some tweets being like, I'm so desperate for hope right now that I'm like crying over the election of a mayor in a city that I've never been to. And so I think that was the feeling like, like in my like group chats with my friends, we were all like, oh my gosh, like he won. But also I think we had our like version of it in the election last summer, because even though like, it was sad because it should have been so like joyous, the fact that the Tories were no longer in power after like 14, 12 years, whatever it was. But they were being replaced by this terrible Labour government. So that wasn't the joyous part of it. But what was joyous was that like 5 independents won, and I think was it 4? Yeah, and 4 Green MPs won as well, which is really big because the Greens only had 1 MP for as long as I've known, and ever. And so they now have like 4 MPs, and also there are 5 independent MPs, one of them being Jeremy Corbyn as an independent because he was kicked out of the Labour Party by Starmer's Labour. Right. And I worked on, I ran like climate canvassing sessions and supported Jeremy's campaign for independent, like running as an independent MP. And that was historic because, it shows that people are willing to vote for alternatives, because independents aren't really like a big thing in the UK before this. And all of these independents ran on solidarity with Palestine. That was the biggest focus of what they were doing. And it shows that people care very deeply enough to like oust the major parties for that. And even independents who didn't win, like Leanne Mohammed, she is a Palestinian woman, young Palestinian woman. She ran against Wes Streeting, who is one of the most senior Labour politicians, and she only lost by 500 votes, which is so
crazy.
wild. Like he's one of the most powerful Labour MPs, like, and the fact that she almost beat him, and I think she hopefully will beat him in the next election, that's huge. And it showed that grassroots people power can have a really big impact. And I think Zoran really showed that. But I want people to also remember in all of this is think about like how much money is being spent on making you believe that these things are not possible, how much money is being spent on making you believe that taking action is futile, that if you decide to speak up that you're just performative and that it's not really impactful, and the joy in all that money being wasted in the fact that and the joy in also that our like people power, our grassroots organizing can be more impactful than their money. Like it's not just like money that wins. It's the people who can win.
Totally true. This has been such a wonderful conversation, and I really thank you for what you do and for sharing your time with us. The book, again, is called It's Not That Radical. How proud are you of this book?
I'm really proud of it, yeah.
Are your parents proud of you?
My parents are very proud of it. My
your grandmother?
She's very proud. So, I am really proud of it. It's, and thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all the work that you do.
Oh, thank you.
And for everyone behind the camera, the work that you're doing. So you can find me on Instagram at Mikaela Loach, or on X or TikTok or Blue Sky, Mikaela Loach. And I also have a kids book called Climate is Just the Start, which is for middle grades, so like 8 to 12-year-olds.
Is the kids book available in the United States?
Yeah, it's with Random House Children's,
great.
In the US. So you should be able to get that from your local library. Listen,
from medical doctor to writer, author, campaigner, activist, really intellectual leader. You're thoughtful. Thank you so much for what you do and for doing all the studying you've done to sort of get these insights and share them with us and our audience. So we're really appreciative.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.